now we're going to hear from Emma on her 3 things. Please, Emma.
Okay, hello everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to kind of continue the theme on culture, and it's something I feel really passionate about, that if you want to build a growing company, you have to build, and there's a deliberate emphasis on the build, an inclusive culture. And if I'm really honest, I didn't understand that for the first half of my career. I worked in a fantastic organization called Unilever, which was obsessed with customers, really obsessed. And I learned lots and lots of things there, but it wasn't as obsessed about culture. And at least when I was working there, it took me going to work in Latin America, where you don't get anything done unless you think about how you deliver through people, and then working in amazing people-centric businesses, a bit like the one Joanna's talked about, but like Wagamama. And I now really passionately believe that the multiplier for growth businesses is caring very much about your customer, but also caring very much about building an inclusive culture. So if you can think about that, customer and culture. I suspect lots of you who are business leaders probably do this second nature. I've seen some fantastic examples of great cultures in small businesses. So please forgive me if you think that there's nothing new in here. But I'm going to talk about 3 things. My 3 things are: you have to prioritize as a task designing your culture as you grow. So in the way that you think about cash flows, in the way you think about your business reputation, you should be thinking about culture. And why is that? Because culture is what will get you out your teams out of bed in the morning. It's also, and we've seen it during COVID, or I saw it a lot in COVID, a fantastic culture is what ensures people give discretional effort when times are tough. And in small businesses, there are often times when things are a bit unpredictable, and that's when you need your teams to really lean in and say, put their hand up and say, I really want to help. So what does designing culture mean? Well, for me, what it's meant has been spending time codifying what your culture actually is, because everybody's culture is different, and what the ingredients are and why that's special. And then thinking about how can we kind of nurture those ingredients. That's in terms of who we bring in, who we recruit, but it's also in terms of the rhythms and routines that you have in your business that might be celebrating the culture. And I suppose what I would say to you as small business leaders is it has to come from you. It has to be authentic. Don't feel you have to have the culture of Billy Bob down the road. It's your culture. But you will need to put a bit of energy into this. If you can afford to have a really good HR lead, they might help you, but there are lots of companies that can also help you do this. We can perhaps talk in the Q&A about it. So have it on your board agendas. Do not take it for granted. Spend time designing your culture. So that's the first thing. My second point is I think it concerns the why of why diversity and inclusion is so important. I suppose what I would really encourage you to do is to treat it like a tick box HR exercise. My son is a big fan. My 17-year-old son is a massive fan of the US series of The Office. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who's watched the US series of The Office, but episode 2 of series 1 is called Diversity Day. And it's probably worth watching. You can watch it as a YouTube clip, but it is really quite funny watching Steve Carell try to be politically correct and makes so many gaffes. And I think that's one of the things that's happened with diversity and inclusion is people think of it as an HR exercise. And throughout my career, whenever I've worked in teams where there are more sorts of different people, whether that's race, actually culture, in Unilever and international teams, they're very good at this, experience, what happens is that the more difference there is in a team, the more everybody feels comfortable and gives of their whole self. So the bottom line is, if you want to get outperformance, which is what growth is about, from your teams, you need people rocking up and giving of their whole selves. And they do that because they feel safe. You know, if they feel safe, if we feel psychologically safe, we don't activate the fight or flight mechanism. And that's really why inclusion is so important. That's what inclusion gives you. So what does that mean for you in practice as you're growing your businesses? I mean, don't have things like diversity days. You might want to have inclusion committees, but I would, who support diversity. I think it's about you thinking as you recruit people about recruiting different sorts of people. Do not just recruit in your likeness. So that's my third piece of advice. But to bring that home, please watch the second episode of The Office. You'll enjoy it. And then the third and final piece of advice really is about, well, how do you know if you've got happy and fulfilled teams and you've got this great inclusive culture? And this is really simple. You have to ask them, and you have to ask them in a way that is that they can honestly tell you. So you sitting around and going, hey, tell me how everyone's feeling is not going to work. But whilst we all hate email surveys, there's some really good people like Culture Amp who do really good pulse surveys. And so I would encourage you, the best businesses I've worked in have kind of periodic check-ins with their team. Team know they're coming. They're asked to participate. Often they're badged in a way. In Merlin Entertainments, where I work, we had this fantastic survey called The Wizard Wants to Know, because we were about entertainments. And, you know, we all over the business, there were posters saying, you know, this is what the wizard wants to know, the survey's coming, and then the individual posters saying what people had said and what was being done. You know, there was a real sort of emphasis on the survey. In Wagamama, our internal employee proposition was Be You Be Wagamama. So the internal survey was called Be You Be Heard. So I would just really encourage you to find ways as you grow of talking to your teams and being prepared to go out and talk to them when you think, actually, I don't know the answer. So I had an experience when George Floyd was murdered and the Black Lives Matter movement happened. And I just thought, I don't really understand what my team are feeling about it. And we did a survey very, very quickly. And actually, I had thought our organisation was fantastic in terms of inclusion, but discovered that some people felt that we were actually had some problem areas, actually to do with the way customers were treating staff, and we weren't facing into a sort of an anti-racist policy towards our staff. And I only found that out because I surveyed the 6,000 people at that moment. And I chose to do that because if I'd waited to the annual survey, the moment would have passed. So those are my three things. They're not rocket science. I expect you're sitting there thinking, I know these, but nurture your culture like you nurture your P&L. Do not take it for granted. Have it on your board agenda. That's point number one. As you build your teams, ensure they are diverse. Do not think of diversity and inclusion like a training exercise from the US series of The Office. And the third one is take regular, independent temperature checks of how people are feeling and be prepared to listen to them and act on them.